that he had a brain injury because he just showed signs of that. That's about all. They were pretty sure he had internal injuries but had no way of diagnosing that. They were sure he had fractures but they had no way of diagnosing that. So they just were trying to keep him alive and stabilize him. That started a long 5 days of waiting and watching and finding out what would happen. Dr. Vreen was the doctor there. He was a Dutch doctor who had been there many years and had, out of necessity, done many surgeries and procedures to save people's lives and to make their lives better. He took Dave into his home. His wife is a nurse, and she and several missionary nurses took care of him for the next 5 or 6 days that we were in Indonesia. There was no x-ray machine, there was nothing there except just basic medical equipment. I was told that he could die at any time. And I remember one time, right before they did that surgery on him where he kept stopping breathing, that they told me he probably won't make it through this surgery. And that was the only time I remember really being upset, because I couldn't imagine having to tell Mike and Gary that their daddy had died.
As my dad went through surgeries and stuff, they talked about moving him to Australia. Well, I was supposed to go with them to Australia, and so they sent over a transport plane to pick him up. The first time I saw my dad after his accident was that day when they were transporting him. He had a breathing tube coming out of his mouth, his head was shaved, and he didn't look like my dad. And I even told my mom, I said, "Mom, that's not my dad." And she said, "No, that is." And I said, "No, that's not my dad." So I was pretty adamant that the man on the stretcher was not my dad. And in ways, it wasn't.
When we were in Wamena, probably the 2nd or 3rd day, the program manager and his wife, Ron and Mike Land, asked me, if you could have anything right now, what would you want? And I said, I'd want my mom. And I hardly even remembered saying that. And a few hours later, they came back to me and said, your mom's going to be on her way. It'll take her several days to get here, but she's on her way.
I was supposed to travel on that transport plane with my mom and Uncle Ron, who was one of the pilots over there with us to Australia. Well, there was a weight limit, and I would have put the plane overweight, which is funny to me because I probably weighed 35 pounds soaking wet. So I'm not exactly sure what happened. It made me very mad after I didn't get to go with them to Australia. I went to live with Mike in the hostel.
When in the hospital in Australia, Dave was totally unconscious for about 2.5 weeks before he even opened his eyes. And then by the time we left, 2 months later, he could open his eyes, and that was about all. The hardest part of the accident. That Dave, the old Dave, pretty much died that day in Wamena on the airstrip. And that was pretty hard to accept. But I knew that God was sovereign and that was part of His will and purpose in our lives, just as much as our going to Indonesia or being a pilot mechanic family, that had been part of it, and so I knew that He would be faithful.
When I first got to see my dad after the accident, he was at Blodgett Hospital in Grand Rapids. And that was the first time I got to see him. It was 2 months after the accident. I had finished school and flown back to the States with my brother, and we were staying with family. I just remember walking into the room, and I don't think he could talk. He had glasses on and had a beard and looked completely different, and I remember thinking, is that my dad? I know it was just hard for a 7-year-old to process that.
My dad's recovery was a really long process that took years and years to even. We never knew much about head injuries and how long and severe some of them could be. He couldn't talk, he couldn't walk, he would get angry. Just with head injuries, you get really confused, and he didn't know what was going on. He always was asking to go home, and he didn't know where home was even. He got better and better. We spent 8 months out in California, and he did rehabilitation out there, and I think that really helped him out a lot, because he actually had to do stuff on his own, and it forced him to do stuff on his own. But it was a very long recovery. He also did speech therapy, and I remember him sitting at the kitchen table going through his speech therapy, saying words and sounds, so that he can pretty much learn how to talk again.
No one really knows what it is to be alone, since you've never left our side. No, you've never left our side. Omnipresence means that you're never far away. You're always within reach, always within reach. Hallelujah, God is near. Hallelujah, Christ is close. Hallelujah, God is near. Hallelujah.
She had to become the provider, and she didn't have skills to do that, so she went back to her question to her mother when she was younger of a missionary or a nurse, and she chose the nurse, so she went into training. And being a mother and wife and caregiver, she went through nurses training. It was difficult for her.
My mom in that accident lost her spouse, her leader. She talks about my dad driving almost everywhere, doing the finances, just bringing direction to their marriage. And her friend, my grandma and grandpa, talk about how they would laugh and joke together and just enjoy each other. My mom lost a lot.
What's a day in the life of living with Dave? He has very little short-term memory and very little long-term memory. If he went to the dentist this morning, he would not be able to tell you that by afternoon probably. If he loves to watch sports, he kind of knows what's going on in the sports world a little bit. He loves to watch the games, but the next day he can't tell you who won. He maybe, if it was really exciting, and he might be able to tell you like one play that happened, but other than that, no. So every day's a new day. He knows us, he knows our names, he knows the grandkids' names, pretty much. He recognizes people from the past, people that were involved in his life prior to the accident. He's learned some people, new people, but not very much. He'd have to be around them a lot, and it would have to be a significant role for him to know that.
Dad, does it bother you when you can't remember something?
Sure, I'd like to, but no big deal. You know, can't remember, you can't remember.
Good answer.
What are your favorite sports teams?
Tigers, Pistons.
What about the Lions?
Nah.
How do I help Dave remember? It doesn't do any good to get mad. It doesn't, even if you yell a lot, doesn't help. The only effective way is to leave notes, and so his bathroom and his closet are full of notes. It's kind of embarrassing, but that's the only way that's effective to remind him what's appropriate and what isn't.
My dad spends a lot of time in God's Word. He will read his Bible every morning, every night. During the day, he'll pick up different books and read books about the Lord, and he just spends a lot of time in God's Word. It's something that after the accident, his mind was changed. He acts very different, but we can realize that one thing at the core of him that he loved was the Lord before the accident, and that comes out now after the accident.
One of the ways that Dave is able to do things for other people is he folds the bulletin every week, and he loves to do it. Nobody else in the world would love to do it, but he loves to do it.
If you have a chance to interact with my dad now, do it. You can't really say the wrong thing, but he enjoys talking to people, and if he knew you before his crash, he would love that interaction. Tell them your name, and he loves to play games and talk about sports, especially the Tigers or the Pistons. He loves interaction. If somebody talks to him, it makes his day.
I've learned a lot about God in this process. God doesn't make life easy all the time. And I've learned that bad things happen to good people. And He's faithful. God is a faithful God that will take care of us. Through everything that happened, Mike and I and my mom have been taken care of by family, by church family. We have just great support, and God placed the people in our lives that we needed to make it through.
Well, I think as far as Karen and David, if it weren't for Karen, David would never have been with us at all. He would have been in a home. And Karen, when you think of what she had to go through, and having that at home, she had nurses and so forth, but yet at night he'd want to get up and do something, and Karen had to kind of talk to him, and it was very difficult for her. It really was.
Everything she does, she cares. She does it to help me out. No matter whether it's cooking or cleaning or anything, she does it that'll help me out, help me still do things. She hasn't given up on me, which is key.